You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast. And this week, we're getting back to a slightly delayed, our apologies for that, preview of Murders at Karlov Manor, or MKM, Not Magic Card Market, the Magic set. So we've got our usual Goldilocks style plan, and don't worry, we'll tackle the Surveil lands at the end. With that, let's take it away.
So for me, when I was looking through the set and I was listening to people discuss what was coming up, I looked at this from a purely Commander standpoint because we didn't really know where Standard was going. And this being the 12th set in Standard, it seemed highly unlikely that this was going to be terribly impactful. So I came at this through the lens of Commander, and the one card that stood out as being overhyped is Ansrog the Quake Mole, purely from a Commander standpoint. And when you take a look at this overall, Ansrog is the number 3 Commander right now on rec behind Judith and Voja respectively. It is currently in, about 1,400 decks rounded up. And it looks like a really good card, but I don't think the story that's being told about it is really correct. A lot of people look at this as being a perfectly good card for the 99 in Commander. That is just something you would want in the deck overall, and I think that's where people have gone a little bit sideways. So for Ansrog, this is 2, a red and a green for an 8/4 that says whenever it becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. So basically, if you can force the block of Ansrog, you can continue to move through combat. And it also has an activated ability of 3 double red, double green. Ansrog must be blocked each combat this turn if able. So you can use the activated ability, or you could use a card like Lure, or not Brash Taunter, but like Taunting Elf. There are a number of ways to make sure that Ansrog can be blocked each combat, and thus you continue to accrue combat steps. Now, obviously, this wants to make blocking difficult for your opponents, which is great. Everyone knows that math is for blockers, so 10 out of 10, no notes on this card, really. Where I think people do go sideways is looking at this as a card in the 99 instead of as a commander. And this basically goes in like the heavy punch style Gruul decks, helmed by Xenagos, God of Revel, Rurik Thar the Embowed, etc. And in those decks, Ansrog is a fantastic tool in the kit, but as a general, rather than somewhere in a robust tutor suite. So instead of having to enter combat across multiple turns, you can helm those decks instead with Ansrog. So instead of using Xenagos and having to enter combat 3 times, or 3 turns in a row to clear somebody out, you can use Ansrog as your commander, then Xenagos in the 99, tutor up Xenagos, drop it on board, and run people over all in one turn because of Ansrog, right? So this basically helps slim those decks up and helps them win a little bit faster overall, and kind of creates more of a combo finish for the entire table rather than heavy punching one person out at a time. This effectively can change the face of these kinds of decks by putting multiple combat steps, quote unquote, in the command zone rather than fishing up Xenagos and Blightsteel with like a tooth and nail if you're helmed by like Rurik Thar or vice versa. So for me, that's overhyped. I think you're in the same camp as well with Ansrog.
I am. So Ansrog was the one, and this is, again, we pick our 3 cards without knowing what the other is picking and kind of come into it blind. I think this is overhyped because I agree it is better suited as a commander, but even as a commander, I don't think it's the best extra combats commander. I still think that's Aurelia.
Okay.
She combos with herself effectively, and Ansrog outside, like, he doesn't do anything without some extra assistance. You have to activate the ability. You have to put Lure on him. You have to go through extra steps.
Exactly.
This is Aurelia at home.
Yep.
And Aurelia just gives you the extra combat step. Just boom, boom,
yep,
and you get in. The other thing that I think is a problem with this card is I'm paying 4 mana for an 8/4, which is well above rate, except there's no evasion whatsoever. which I get it. You want it to be blocked, so you don't want the evasion, but it's also a 4 butt, which is really easy to get rid of when you're swinging on the ground. In the air, different story. You've got to have a commander design for it.
Yeah, 100%.
But Avenger of Zendikar drops on the ground and drops 1,000,000 tokens. Craterhoof. There's just plenty of ways to deal with this card that I think, people are missing. To me, there's 2 big financial drivers that should be effective on this card, and one is it as a general, and 2 is the fact that it's a mole, which sounds ludicrous, but that's pretty memey.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, this is like the 3rd or 4th mole we've ever gotten. So Mole Combat Tribal is a long ways off from happening.
Yeah.
And I think without that kind of support, this card just isn't worth $12 as a mythic and a set with collector boosters that has a showcase treatment. And the insertion rate for that is going to be higher in play boosters. It's going to be higher in the collector boosters than some of the lower rarities. And I just don't see this holding. I think at pre-sales it was like $30 or something.
Yeah, it spiked almost to 40 very quickly.
That's ridiculous. And I still think 10 is too much for this card. I just don't think it's going to have an impact.
No.
Even with the invisibles, where something like this may actually work and kind of drive the market. I don't think it suits this price point at all. I just don't see that happening.
I don't think so either. Like I said, I wanted to call it very specifically the heavy punch style of Gruul deck, where you do have Xenagos or Roguethar unbowed, and the idea is that you go 2 direct Blightsteel Colossus and just chunk somebody out of the game in that one turn, and then the next turn you untap and chunk somebody out again. To your point, this has 8 toughness to really get this card working, and without having to pay 6 mana. Like that turn on top of however much it costs to cast Ansrog and attack with it that turn, you need to set up like Dark Steel Plate or Mithril Coat. You need to set up Allure, like you mentioned. You need all these other pieces to get this to work. And at the end of the day, we're seeing this in like almost 3,000 decks total on Rec when you sum up as Commander and in the 99. And once people, I believe, realize correctly that this belongs in the command zone because it gives you in Gruul a very useful effect. That
it does.
The price on this tanks, the utility and adoption on this card tanks overall, and so it just kind of flattens out. I don't think of this card as, you mentioned, like Aurelia at home, and I think that's a really apt comparison because I didn't even think about this. I didn't even think about this as multiple combats deck. I thought about this as punch everybody out in one combat deck, kind of like Godo. To me, that's how this card wants to work, and I think of Aurelia and Godo as 2 different kind of abilities, despite the fact that you're right. They are factually the same thing, just multiple combats. And that's, for me, when I was looking at this, I just saw it a little bit differently, and when you do that comparison work, this is definitely like one of the worst options overall, unless you literally are playing already this style of deck, and then just jam it in there, and this is perfectly fine, because I keep mentioning Tooth and Nail. That's a huge part of these decks. Worldly Tutor is a huge part of these decks. If you have multiple combat steps, you don't need Xenagos and Blightsteel Colossus, you just need Blightsteel Colossus, and it just gets the job done. But there's just so much lead work that needs to be done to make this card useful in the format on the whole, that I think it's ridiculous that it was as hyped as it was, and to your point, as expensive as it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ansrog, that is my overhyped. That is your overhyped as well. For me, my underhyped is Forensic Gadgeteer. This one's a little interesting. It is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 Vidalcan Artificer Detective, and most of those creature types don't matter. It has a triggered ability. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you investigate, so you create a clue. And then it has a passive. Activated abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 colorless less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana, which is, what we see all the time on these abilities. Currently, it's in about 3,000 decks on, according to Rec. It is the 15th most popular card in the entire set, and that is behind the lands. And I think that is just incredibly out of proportion here. Forensic Gadgeteer. This card helps power artifact synergies as well as adding a redundant element to artifact combo pieces with the passive. We're talking about cards like Zerda and Training Grounds, and I can't think of the... is it Kinnan Bond or Prodigy? Or
that's the...
There's another Simic one. I just can't think of off the top of my head that's played.
Chain.
There's one that's played in Vintage Cube. It's another Simic one. I can never remember the name.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Almost the exact same things. Like, these help artifact combo deck with the passive overall. For the immediate implications of just being a combo piece, the buzz around this card seems awfully low, or was awfully low, still is awfully low, as it has the opportunity to be in an overwhelmingly large number of strategies across the Commander format. And that's before we even really actually talk about that cast trigger. That is the first bit of text on the card.
It's so good.
It is. It effectively gives you a 2-for-1 on every artifact you cast by quantity, one of which is a clue, which is incredibly useful. And I don't see how something like this that can be so ubiquitous between artifact combo and just going wide artifacts was treated so poorly in terms of hype. This is already in Vintage Cube lists available on Moto. If it's not in the official Vintage Cube, then it's in the Alpha Frog Cube, which is drafted still oftentimes offline and played on Moto. This is a card that is building a pedigree right now. Why it was the 15th most popular card behind a bunch of lands, I don't know. Like, sure, the lands can go on a ton of decks, but this one just immediately combos out. Like, cool, why aren't we looking at this overall? Why is this behind, some of the weird, goofy commanders when you look at the overall number of cards in the set? It is hard to believe that is the case. When it comes to price at $2, I think it'll hold. Like, it spiked to over 7, which I think is ridiculous. Or sorry, that's another card comment. It spiked to over 7. I think it spiked to like 3 or 4. I think that is most likely the hold in the long run. I don't think it'll make it up to 5. But if it does, I wouldn't be surprised, because at this point in time, we have so many versions of the passive, if you want to call it that, the mana value reduction across blue and Simic, that we're going to hit a critical mass, and it's going to be nigh impossible to not utilize these in your deck and combo out the end. That's just the way, like, blue and Simic decks are going to shape themselves when they want to play artifacts and Commander, and this is an incredibly good piece to have in that deck.
I think a lot of people are missing the point with this card, because I've seen a lot of people that are like, well, this is just way worse. Like, why wouldn't I run Ethereum Sculptor? Because it doesn't do the same thing. They're not nearly the same card. And to me, that's one of the big differences with this, and why people have been kind of missing the hype around it, is it's not the same thing as what a lot of people are making it analogous to. It's not Herald of Kozilek. Like, it's not here for a combo engine in the sense of I'm future sighting with Sensei's Divining Top. And I think that's one of the big things that people are missing, is, like you said, it powers the power artifact synergies, it powers card draw and card filtering. It's just a good value card with a combo finish. Yeah. Like, it's people just seem to be missing that. Yeah. So I completely agree. Oh, sorry, were you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. My too low is actually kind of in keeping with tradition for me, an uncommon from this set. And that is Insidious Roots. Specifically, I'm talking the showcase version here. And this card is Cadaverous Bloom mana, black and green, for something that is not quite as good as Cadaverous Bloom, but that's fine because that card won a Pro Tour. And we basically don't have them now. It reads, creature tokens you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Stop on its own, it's already Cryptolith Right.
Yep.
Kind of. It's Cryptolith Right at home. That's still a very good card, it turns out. Even at uncommon in a set with collector boosters, where you'll be able to get this alt art. But then the second half is what really, to me, drills it home. And that is whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a plant token and put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. I think this card is undervalued. I think this card is underadopted, because this literally already has about 30 decks that it should automatically be in the 99 of. And it's anything running Avenger of Zendikar and Scavenging Ooze. It doesn't matter if you're running them together. This card synergizes so well with everything that these colors do that it should be an automatic, like, not quite Soul Ring level inclusion, but certainly Deathrite level inclusion into these decks. Now, it doesn't synergize particularly well with Reanimator shenanigans, because you obviously don't want the cards to leave your graveyard. But if you're a deck that is going to eat cards from a graveyard for a Scavenging Ooze or a Deathrite or something like that, this is great. If you're a Delve deck, this is great. If you're
playing exiling, Soil, this is great.
Yes, there are so many good cards, so many cards that this synergizes with incredibly well, that to me, sitting at a low of, I think it's like $1.88, is wild to me. Additionally, to harken back to my pick last week, something very interesting is going on with the foils of this card. And this may be something that we see because of the delayed recording, but the foil version of this showcase is far outpacing the value of the non-foil.
Okay.
The non-foil can be had for about $2 right now. $6 is the cheapest foil version, and it's starting to plateau off after coming back down. So with that being the case, this is something that I think may be worth picking up, a couple copies here and there, just seeing what you can get in, because I think this is easily a $15 foil, and I think the non-foil gets to $7 or $8. I think this card is incredible, and this is a long-term burn. But this card is just, I read it and I was like, this is an uncommon. This is something that, and granted, power creep is real, 2 years ago would have been a mythic. And I mean, it's Cryptolith with upside.
Yep.
And Cryptolith was effectively, mythic power level at the time. So it was just wild to me to see this, and I think that the adoption for this has been incredibly slow. And I think that this is a card that may not only see play in EDH, but could also see play in Legacy and potentially Vintage. We'd have to get way more creature heavy there, but it's definitely something that I can see in some of the more grindy mid-range loam style lists. And I think it's great. I think it has an absurd amount of upside, and it finishes games very quickly on the back of an Avenger of Zendikar.
Yeah, this isn't the worst thing to cast, and right now people are doing a big F around to find out with Dredge and Legacy and actually adding lands to the list. But I'll tell you what, every turn in Icarid comes back. Every time you recast a Hogak, man, this triggers Insidious Roots. This is actually on my list in the exact same spot as Underhyped, and I just had one sentence before I moved on. As I was taking my notes when I decided to move to Gadgeteer, and it is this: a lot of cards make plants, and this plays really well with various keywords like Delph.
Yeah.
Avenger of Zendikar makes a ton of 0/1 plants in particular.
And I love putting counters on them. Great.
Yeah. So this is another example of reading the card kind of explains the card. You can, and then you can just go off the deep end, man. On the surface, you got a lot to do with this, and the more you look at it, the more that comes of it, and that's always generally pretty appealing when a card has depth of play.
Yeah.
For me, for my just right, I decided on Archdruid's Charm, and I was waffling between this and Pride of Hulklade. But the longer I took to actually investigate this, the more Pride of Hulklade fell off, and I thought that's kind of incorrect, but I didn't really want to talk about that one too much. Archdruid's Charm, I think, is an incredibly useful and modal card, like it's supposed to be. It is from, I guess what will be a 5-color cycle of Archmage, Archdruid, etc.'s Charm. It costs 3 green pips, like the blue one costs 3 blue, and it has 3 modes, though technically 4. So the first mode is when you search your library for a creature or land card and reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield tapped if it's a land card, otherwise put it into your hand, then shuffle. The second mode is put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So that's a bite, not a fight. And then the third mode is exile target artifact or enchantment. So the reason this is 3.5 modes is because the first one gets a land or a creature. Now, this is an instant. So this is effectively the best version of Reap and Sow that we have ever had. Reap and Sow costs 3 and a green. Sylvan Scrying costs a colorless and a green and puts it into your hand. So now we've kind of hit that sweet spot of finding what the mana cost is. Not just value, cost, because it's triple green, remember. It costs triple green at instant speed to find a non-basic land and put it into play, although tapped, which is fine. It's basically just an advanced fetch land.
Yeah.
Now, as far as this goes within the set for Commander, this is currently the second most popular card in the set. And I think that is just right for this card. The flexibility and power inherent in this card makes it a slam dunk for what is basically one of the most popular and well-hyped cards in the set. The moment this card was spoiled, it just started to burn bright in terms of interest and what people were talking about, and it only really dropped off heading into RC Denver, where Modern took over and a number of cards from MKM popped up and just stormed the event.
Yeah.
Every mode on this card is useful, and there's not a single part in a single game where this card is bad. You have a bunch of lands on the battlefield, cool. Go get a creature. There's no limit on the amount of mana that it requires. Fierce Empath, 6 or more. A little bit limiting, but it's on a creature. Cool. Summoner's, not Summoner's Pact, Summoning Trap.
Yeah.
Top 8 cards. Little limiting. See the Unwritten. I think that also goes to either 6 or 8. Little limiting. Then you got to look into things like Tooth and Nail, which can find it and put it into play. So that's either 7 or 9 mana. And you realize pretty quickly that Archmage Charm is costed very aggressively for what it does.
Yeah.
The Exile on artifact or enchantment, pretty useful in Commander. Maybe not necessarily the most at your table, but cool. Attack on mode. Maybe you don't want to run that Naturalize, or maybe you just want an additional Naturalize on top of that. Cool. Archmage Charm got you, and then some. The only difficulty to play this card, the only hurdle, is the fact that it's got 3 green pips. So if you wanted to go fish early in the game, you got to be base green. You got to be really heavy green to do that. But that doesn't really seem like a problem for this overall. Green pips are not hard to come by, and at this point in time, we're flush with dual lands when it comes to the Commander format. So I think this card is just going to ride high for a really long time.
Yeah, I think this card is great, and it's one that at first I saw a lot of people grasp onto, and I was like, well, maybe it is that good, but I don't really think so. And the more I read it, the more I realized, no, this card's just insane. Yeah. It almost guarantees like a 2-for-1 in combat as a combat trick. You can double block. You can eliminate. It's just a very good utility. Yeah. It's just a really good utility card. Mm-hmm. And I think that as strange as it is, the most valuable mode on it may be discard or exile an artifact or enchantment. Stapling that on there is just a huge win overall, because sometimes, it's just as easy as removing their Daybreak Coronet and I live for another turn. That's incredibly valuable in Modern. I think that's where this is really going to showcase.
Yeah, the reason why I downplayed that in the explanation is because not every table has somebody that is so reliant on their artifacts and enchantments that you have to worry about recursion. But when you do, that exile is very important, like you're saying. 100%. Yeah. Otherwise, you have Nature's Claim and stuff like that. That's a little easier, Unravel the Aether, etc. But this is just murk it. Just gone. Get out of here.
It's gone.
Yeah.
My Just Right is actually kind of surprising for me. I would not have expected to pick a rare that also appears in collector boosters with a showcase treatment for this, but here we are. Mm-hmm. And it is Leyline of the Guild Pact. So before I get into why I think this card is great, I have one reason why this card confuses me but kind of makes sense. Why are there 4 green pips on the casting cost? Doesn't matter. You can still cast it for 4 mana of any sort of colors. Now, this has the typical Leyline of if it's in your hand,
in your opening 7
ETBs.
Yeah.
Each non-land permanent you control is all colors. Lanes you control are every basic land type in addition to their types. So this is relevant for a few reasons. Obviously, everything being 5 colors means that if it ever happens, which it probably won't now, Coalition Victory is an instant win. This means that the most important line of text, though, is the bottom. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. Now, the reason this is relevant is because it's not that they become Painless Cities of Brass. It's that they retain their types. Mm-hmm. So if you have something like
Valakut.
I don't know. Yes. Anything that cares about land types, this is relevant. It also means you're not pinging yourself for it. It also means Price of Progress, they're still basics. Now, this is an auto-include in every 5-color deck. It just is. I think this makes every 5-color deck immediately more accessible for people because your mana base gets significantly less expensive. You don't need 10 duels.
Yeah.
Okay, all of my lands are Painless Cities.
Yeah,
so I can just run a bunch of basics, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, so it's another tool in the kit. You got Dryad of the Elysian Grove. You have Omen, Prismatic Omen.
Yeah, Prismatic
Leyline
Omen.
of the Guild Pact, and Chromatic Lantern at least right now. So yes, 5-color decks are becoming much more approachable to be able to play a less expensive mana base and still be able to cast your spells. And the World Tree.
Yeah, and the World Tree, that's the other one. And I think that that's something that's incredibly good for the health of EDH. I don't think this card ever sees playing a 60-card format. But I think this is something that you'll start to see, that this card is so good and it is so accessible is the other thing, because it's in a current run set, that, okay, I guess I'm going to start building a 5-color Leylines deck because we have 15 ley lines plus this one now, or I'm going to build a 5-color elemental deck because we have so many elementals. This just automatically slides into every one of those and makes it incredibly accessible for a casual player to now all of a sudden, okay, here's another tool.
Yeah.
I now have 5% of my deck is cards that specifically enable this. Not to mention, enchantment is actually a pretty easy to tutor for card type now, almost up there with creatures, where we have a million ways that we can get this into our hand if it's past the opener, and I just have some green mana that I need to spend.
Mm-hmm.
I think that $15 for something that should become this ubiquitous is more than fair. I also think when we had it spike up to, I think stock said it was like 30 almost, or
because
20,
of the RC, yeah.
25, yeah, because of the RC. We're starting to plateau and level off again.
Yeah.
So we're sitting at about what I think is an appropriate price point for this card at around $15, because it should be something that becomes ubiquitous in adoption. If you have a group of 4 EDH players, odds are at least one of them has more than one 5-color deck. And this slides right into that.
Yep.
And I think that's what it really gets into, is that every play group has 1 or 2 people that had their 5-color decks, and this immediately goes into it now.
Yeah.
And I think that long term, 15 is perfect for it.
Yep, I agree. My concern for this card wasn't necessarily Commander, because I read this and I was like, okay, cool, another tool in the kit, like you pontificated about. My concern was, like you brought up at the beginning, why does this have 4 green pips? I don't know, but that's a lot of pips for Pioneer, and we are coming up on that season. So $15 right now could be 25 or 30 if this slides into the mono green list, or we get a change in that. There's a lot that can be done between this card and Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, right? So overall, if this doesn't muck up that format, then yeah, $15 seems fine. If not, maybe a little aggressive in price. I think somewhere between 10 and 15 is great overall. If it maintains its kind of foothold in Modern and allows 5C Rhinos or Scion of Draco to just kind of exist and be a deck, then yeah, this will probably hold closer to 15. There are people that are mucking around with this in Vintage and Legacy, which is really fun because this ups the stock of the blasts. You can play 8 Rebs if you want. You can play 8 Bebs if you want. Perfectly fine when you know the format's going to be chugging full of ley lines, but because it's Legacy and Vintage, those formats are going to kind of police themselves because you have 8 blasts available to you. So if I expect us to see this continue on in Constructed, it'll be Modern, where it's just kind of juicing the Rhinos deck a little bit. Pioneer, if this mucks with mono green, then I'm pretty sure we'd see another ban shortly thereafter, and it would drop the utility of this card in that format overall. I like the card on its surface. It does a lot. It really does help the Commander players who want to stretch into 5 colors. It makes it a lot more accessible. Like you're saying, it allows you to build a much more efficient mana base. When you look at this, you can just do so much more with so much less because of cards like this. And I think overall, it's just a really nice card to have. And it seemed, when you cut out Constructed, appropriately hyped for Commander. Like right now, I don't even think it's in like, it's outside. Yeah, it's like somewhere in the top 20, 15, 16.
Yeah.
So that would be 20. Yeah, it's in like the top 25 cards in the set on rec right now. Awesome. I think that is a perfectly fine place for a card like this. This is the kind of card that I would expect to be below the lands from the set.
Yeah.
Because the lands help power cards like this. They help you find this card. They are more useful than something like this overall. And I think it's in a great spot. And I think if it rides it out here or creeps up a little bit, that's great. I don't think it'll jump up. I think, like you said, this is the Goldilocks zone for this card. I think we're on point.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of that,
lands.
The Surveil lands.
Yes.
Thoughts?
They are more useful than the temples because they have basic land types, so they can be fetched up overall, which I really like. I thought that was the downfall of the temples, and that was what was going to keep them out of Eternal formats. Well, when I say Eternal, I mean like Modern. Basically, he's going to keep them out of Modern. I like the idea of their Surveil lands. I don't think Surveil is inherently more powerful than Scry, so whether you Scry one or you Surveil one is up in the air. I think it is truly the land types attached to them that make them the most powerful options. I think they are all overpriced right now and should probably sit between $2 and $4 instead of the $6+ that we're seeing. Like right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. after the top 5 cards in Murders, and that's creature, creature, leyline, creature, creature. It's literally 3 lands is the next most expensive cards in the set.
Yeah.
At $10 and $9. We got one $10, one $9. The rest are sitting in the $3 and $4 range, and I think perfect bangerang. That's where they should be right now. The more the set gets open, the more downward pressure we see. Just like the temples, buy in at the low, move at the high, because will we see them in the future? It'll probably be a while, so there'll be money to be made there, just like the original run of temples. Do I like them in constructed formats because they are fetchable? Yes, but like as a one-of, I think that is appropriate. For Commander, I think they're great. I run them alongside temples because effectively they do the same thing, and I don't juice my Commander decks with fetch lands, so I don't care about the basic land types. Okay. I play low-level, low-power Commander, the way the good Lord Sheldon meant it to be. And I think they're going to do good things for the game overall, because the more utility we can get on our lands, the more ability, like this, not necessarily draw additional cards or pump creatures, whatever. The more we get utility from our lands that allow us to continue to play the game, the better it is. Trying to do that from spells is difficult, because if you don't have the lands to cast your spells, you can't really function that way. So lending a little bit of power and utility to lands overall, I think is really, really good. And I picked up my set of blue ones from my LGS, so I think that's like, is it 4 of them, I think? Yeah, and those are the only ones that I made a call to get, because at some point in time, I might start playing Modern again. Cool, I got them. And in Legacy, there is this trend of when you play a 2-color deck, like, for instance, Doomsday, if you play the Dimir version, or right now I'm playing Dimir Scam. In years past, it was Izzet Delver. Sometimes you do need the 5th dual land. And right now, up until the Surveil lands, the 5th was the Shock. Now you have the ability to go get a Surveil land, and that powers some pretty interesting things in those decks. You can also build your own Entomb with the green-black one.
Yeah.
Where you can Worldly Tutor in response to the Surveil trigger. Or really any of those decks, because you got to have the green ahead of time. This line ETB's tapped. But you have Entomb at home, and you get to surveil the creature into the graveyard with Worldly Tutor. So it does put some pressures on interesting cards like that when it comes to older formats. And at the end of the day, I think this is perfectly fine. I think the price tag is ridiculous, but that's it.
Yeah, I think the price tag now is, like, realistically for some of these, I mean, like, the blue ones are always going to be high. Yep. I think your Golgari one is a little high right now, like $8.
Yes.
But I think you were accurate in saying that these probably settle before too long in the 2 to 4 range. And that's where I'm going to buy as many as I possibly can, because I think that these are realistically $5 to $10 cards in a year, and you can sell infinite of them at $5 to $10. Yep. You can trade out infinite of them at $5 to $10. But the base versions of, like, the black-red, the red-white, the green-white, the white-black, like, sitting at $2 to $3 is insane to me for something like this, because of how powerful Surveil as a mechanic is. So I think right now they're overhyped for where they should be right now.
Yeah, I think that's
fair.
But
I think once time passes, assuming we don't get a mass reprint of these, which who knows, with 2 Universes Beyond style sets, maybe they'll try to find a way to put this into something.
Yeah.
But without that, I think, the $2 to $4 to $5 range is where I want to get in on these, and I want to hoard them. I think long term they're very good.
Yeah, that's.
But not at $8 a piece.
That's what I did with Temples. The ones I opened were the ones I had, and then as they slowly started floating down to like $2 and $3 for the most expensive ones because of blue-white control, etc., I started scooping them up, and then I was a firm believer that as they were rotating out, quarters on them all day long, perfectly fine. And then, it didn't even take additional formats. It just took an amount of time for those temples to go up because the utility on Scry and Commander was insane. And you could start moving them for $2, $3, $4, $5 in time. There was a point where I think I did make a call on the green-white temple for Pioneer when that deck was a thing. And, like, sure, egg on my face for that, but that's because that format changed over time. Then we got Infinity. We got like 3 reprints in a row, or 2 reprints in a row in core sets.
Yeah, and that was rough.
Yeah, and now they're worth the quarters that I was picking them up at. So no harm, no foul on that one. So if your plan is to just ride them out and play them, then that's a perfectly fine move, is to just wait until these are opened into infinity and beyond.
Yeah.
And we'll be fine. All right, picks. And I want you to go first this week because you're sticking on with one of your cards, and I want to get in the Wayback Machine for mine.
All right, so I'm sticking with Insidious Roots, actually, the showcase foil. I think $6 for this is insane. Like I said, it should be 10 to 15 for an effect like this, for something that should be as adopted as an effect like this. Token is just a really common strategy in green-black. Graveyard Shenanigans is also a really common strategy in green-black, or green-black X in both cases. And I think it easily slides into those decks. I think this is the kind of thing that if, any one content creator makes some Graveyard Shenanigan deck with this card, the hype machine rolls on, and everyone wants this card all of a sudden, and we start to see it get to that range that I said, which was in the 5 to 10 range, 10 to 15 for non-foil and foil. The other really interesting thing about this is that if you take a look on TCG Player of the showcase foil vendors, there's 8 total. 8 total. Everyone else has fewer than 4 copies of this card right now, and it's sitting at 76 listings, I believe. Which for a commander or for a collector booster set is not very much, especially for an uncommon. Part of that could be the seeding changes, everything we see there, but I think that timeline-wise, you're looking at probably a year on this one. But I think at $2 for non-foil, $5 for foil, I'd park like 10 of them in a box, forget about them, and check back later and see. While also keeping an eye on content creators. Me personally, I have about 20 of these foils because I am going maximum greed mode on it. At least en route from the post office now. And I think healthily, though, you're probably looking in the 5 to 10 range because, like I said, this is a 100-card format card. This is EDH. Yep. This is Canlander. This might see some play in like a Dredge or something like that as a 1 or 2 of at most, but I don't see it breaking out in a huge way other than in very like niche decks. I'm sure Nick Fit would love this somehow because it's 8 cards and 52 flex slots. But I think this card is great long term. I think it's the kind of thing that, while set agnostic, because this could be reprinted realistically, Insidious Roots is not something that are specific to Karlov Manor.
No.
But I don't think we see it for a while because they have been somewhat reticent to print thematic uncommons in the sets that we've seen like this, where it's built from the theme of, this is a murder mystery dinner kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those they've kind of kept in those sets and not reprinted until they visit another theme where it's relevant. And I don't think, unless God forbid Universes Beyond contains it, we're ever getting Poison Ivy's Winter Wonderland in a Magic set. So I don't think there's a big risk of this card being reprinted, but it is something to keep an eye on as time goes on.
Yeah.
But I think 6 to 12 months on your timeline, you should just naturally see it rise, especially now that we've plateaued in this period before release. I believe next week is when it hits officially, which doesn't really mean anything anymore because of how set releases work. But that's my expectation on this card. I just think it's a really, really good, effective card. And it's one of those, random, every now and then I'll pick out a strong uncommon or common that I think should see more light, and this is the one.
Yep. I think there's opportunity for this card to see a surge with the release of Duskamarn, which is 3 sets from now, which is Q4 2024. Yeah. That is the, horror set. It's supposed to take place entirely inside a haunted house. And while that doesn't quite make sense, we're looking at a card that makes plants, the word roots is the name. It doesn't matter. What it looks for is creatures leaving the graveyard. It doesn't care how. It could be Tormod scripting your opponent out, which I believe you mentioned, right? But the opportunity to muck with the graveyard and regenerate things, there is the opportunity for that inside the mansion, because this is based on slasher films. It's based on the Amityville horror, which so there's going to be this supernatural and preternatural kind of stuff going on. The ability to resurrect the dead effectively is kind of what I'm dancing around here. And we could see that play into this set. So you're looking at a year, I think, to also check in specifically around this set just for additional synergies that might exist, because it is the clearest call out for the possibilities of a recently printed set to impact this card. Between now and then, there's really not the Bloom Barrow and Thunder Junction, and I don't think that's going to do a whole lot for this kind of card. Otherwise, like you mentioned before, you got to look backwards. I think this is one of those premier uncommons, like you mentioned, that happens every now and again in a set. It's nice to identify. It's nice to look at, pull up on. And I don't think there's a reason why you either can or shouldn't go deep on this, because there are already immediate synergies where you can just kind of take advantage of what's going on for your own ends. And the world is your oyster with this card. You just got to figure out what you want to do with it. Writ large within the format, that's probably going to take a push, like you said, content creation or something coming out of one of these additional sets that just sparks joy when you look at this card. And I think it's definitely a good look for tossing it away, like you said, and just keeping an eye on it and making sure, like, hey, what's going on? What are we doing? Where are you? Like, overall, I like the card. I like the pick because it represents, something decent in a pick. We know there's going to be opportunity here. It's not something you got to necessarily hope for when it comes to something released later on. Now, for me, like I said, I'm getting my Wayback Machine, and I'm looking at a card from Worldwake, a card that I never understood why there was zero adoption in the Commander format, and it took up until 2021 really to see a spike, and that is Thada Adel, Acquisitor. Now, this is a card from Worldwake, like I said. It costs 1 double blue for a legendary creature, Merfolk Rogue, 2/2. It has Island Walk. Whenever Thada Adel, Acquisitor, deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for an artifact card and exile it. Then that player shuffles his or her library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. Now, I don't know why this card was really never adopted into the Commander format overall. It's kind of mind-boggling how this card has just sat around and done nothing. When I added this to my list in December, CK was buying 8 at $3. They had 0 in stock for $8.50. There were 35 listings, LP or better on TCG Player for a market of $9. Now, CK, when I was finishing my notes, CK was buying 12 at $11. They had 33 for retail at $5.50, and there were 41 listings on TCG Player for a market of $13.39. Now, we are seeing a little bit of a dip in market, but I think that's going to kind of correct itself. And right now, CK is buying 39 copies at $6.40. So they basically just got their injection as this card was going up in price, because everybody was kind of moving into the spike. But I think we're going to be okay here because, and as I'll touch on later, this card's only been printed once.
Yeah.
Now,
insane.
There's zero reason I can find why this shouldn't have been a 0-day staple within the Commander format. It makes sense that when people were initially playing Commander, they saw this card, they saw Legendary, and they thought, oh, this has to be the Commander. This couldn't possibly go anywhere else. And that's just straight wrong. You can play blue cards in your blue deck under a different Commander. That's perfectly fine. You want to steal someone's Soul Ring? Thada-Adel's got you. You want to ride with somebody else's top down? Thada-Adel's got you. You want somebody's Monocrypt or Vault? Thada-Adel's got you. I just don't know why people didn't play this card. It should be in every deck that plays blue. So either this is an optics issue, meaning people had no idea this card existed, or they didn't want to be, and I'm going to put quotes around this word, aggressive about stealing people's Monocrypts, their Monovaults, their Soul Rings, their Sensei's Divining Tops, etc. But the format has changed.
Sort of feast and famine.
Yep.
I mean, there's so many good options.
Jeweled Lotus. The format has changed. Theft like this is tolerated a bit more as players engage in a more, again, quote-unquote, competitive game and play patterns than they used to, and the format has only gotten more efficient over time. And that all adds up to Thada Adel being more powerful than ever before. This could be your Commander. It could be in the 99. It costs 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue, and comes with Island Walk. So the most difficult part of utilizing this card is making sure your opponents have islands. Now, this really isn't a great hurdle. It's more of a bump, especially with the number of spreading seas effects. And the Mirrodin Gem Quicksilver Fountain connecting with Thada Adel is actually pretty trivial. Like, for those that don't know, Quicksilver Fountain basically puts a counter on a land in every upkeep, and any land with a flood counter on it is an island. And you remove all flood counters when all lands in play are islands. Like, that's it. So you just slowly take over. There's nothing about this card that says, I'm bad in Commander. Like, nothing at all.
It should be insane.
Yep. I brought up the stocks graph earlier, and we did see a spike towards the end of 2001 around call time. And I couldn't really find a reason for that, but the most recent spike from $10 up towards $15 came with Lost Caverns of Ixalan due to an infusion of new merfolk, and I believe that spike was untenable. It was more of a price correction than anything else, as we only see this card rise in value like over time. The market is bearing an increasing price in this card. Those sales velocity on LP and near mint are low overall, but this becomes a $16 card fairly quickly within a couple weeks. We just have to wait for all the low-hanging fruit to disappear. So flipping this back into the open market is where we'll make the most profit. You just have to price aggressively if you want to move this quickly. I don't think buy lists on this are going to cool necessarily for a while. They will most likely keep sawtoothing like we've seen. So if you're going to wait for that out, it'll probably be on the outside of 3 months, but it's going to be a safe move from your binder in the interim. Now, while we are seeing that kind of downtick on TCG Player Market from 3.6 or 3.30, whatever it was, down to about 3.10, that has more to do with the fact that prices less shipping are under $13, but prices with shipping are well over $14 and $15. So this is, again, more of an optics issue like we talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where when you just look at the price point, the data was wrong, but when you considered what's being done to manipulate the price so the vendor gets the price they want, the data supports the fact, this is a card that's rising in price. So buying it now at $13 or $14, again, our out at 16 is coming pretty quickly, like midway through the first page. Like we hit 18, almost $30 before actually there's only one page of listings left on TCG Player right now. We have 41 listings left. Same amount. Okay, yeah. We just hit like a $30 card before we even get to the bottom. And again, the market is bearing this. It's just the graphs are only showing the price point sold, not price with shipping, which is where the actual number is. Yeah. Reprint equity on this. Oh boy. Now, this is a named character from Zendikar, a planet we've been back to twice, who has not shown up since the original set. Yep. With no reprint in a number of possible locations. I don't think we'll actually be seeing this again, as we have access to a 3-mana steal your soul ring effect, and that might be a bit too competitive for WotC's view of the format. You know, they just barely decided to reprint Bribery, and that costs a lot more mana.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one of the reasons. Like, we haven't really had, especially in a standard set, we haven't had a thief effect in a long time.
Not from library like this. We had Daring Skydiver or Thieving Skydiver, whatever it is, from Call of Time.
From play.
That steals from the battlefield. Yeah, great in Vintage Cube. Great, kind of in VRD. Yeah. Like, Dak Faden, another just whoop, but it's got to be on the battlefield. Yeah, I've talked about Praetor's Grasp, Demonic Tutor your opponent's library, same effect. We don't see this happen all the time, and it seems to be too aggressive for WotC's view of like theft. You know? And thus, I really don't think we're going to see a reprint of this. Like I said, Bribery, one of the most effective and efficient thieving effects in the format, was just reprinted, and it was done so in the ancillary Ixalan product, Explorers of Ixalan, whatever that weird like pseudo game thing was.
Yeah,
like that's where we got it. It might have been in a master set shortly thereafter as well. That is a permanent theft effect. It costs 5. You can literally swing with Thada Adel on 3 and steal somebody's soul ring. If you go turn 1 soul ring, island soul ring, turn 2 island, turn 2 boots, you can go turn 3 Thada Adel, equip boots, swing, steal your soul ring, play it, or your Jeweled Lotus, play it for free, right? Like, this card can just rough shot run over a table and start stealing stuff very quickly and very efficiently. Buy quantity on this. I bought my set when the Commander format came into prominence back in 2009, and I've been waiting for people to realize this card was good ever since. I haven't bought any more, and hindsight says I should have, but because it was just a rope for over a decade, like even more than that.
Kind of hard.
Yeah. Even more than that, I just never bothered. I thought, well, this is either really bad for the format, and I don't understand why, or this is really good for the format, and people just don't want to engage in this kind of like dickering. And at the end of the day, I think people should, because it's a really good card. And now that there's kind of this run on it, and it's been sitting on buy lists for a while, people are realizing how good this is. And if anybody comes through with any kind of Commander content with this card, like, you can be
Yeah.
So for me, that's my pick in the Wayback Machine today.
Dig it.
Yep. Anything else before we cut out?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Will you be at Magic Fest Chicago, or will you have been at Magic Fest Chicago for those that will listen to this?
No, unfortunately. I have a vacation plan that weekend.
All right. But there is the possibility, and we'll have to figure this out later, so we can let people know that we will be at Star City events on the East Coast, because,
yes,
as we discussed last week, they're coming to Maryland, D.C., Philly, Columbus, Ohio.
Literally everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere on the East Coast that they've ever been, aside from Boston. So, for at MTG Cabalcast this week, I am at Halt, I am Reptar, you are...
at Thirsty Sizzler.
And we'll see you next week.